From the Field Journal of Diplomatic Military Attaché Thanik, 4th Sphere Concordance. Observation Cycle 7, Rotation 832, Human Calendar Equivalent, June 12, 2700. When the High Command of the 4th Sphere Concordance assigned me to assess potential military threats in the region designated as human space, I approached the task with the methodical precision expected of an attaché of my rank. I have catalogued the martial capabilities of 17 distinct species across 12 star clusters. I have witnessed the psychic battle meditation of the Mornish Collective and survived an observation of the biomechanical war constructs of the Varax Dominion. None of these experiences adequately prepared me for Master Sergeant Samuel Caldwell. Retired. My preliminary research into human military organizations had been thorough, or so I believed. I had analyzed the discipline deficiency of the United Naval Marine Service with their standardized equipment and rigid command structures. I had documented the adaptable tactics of the Colonial Defense Forces, whose decentralized command enabled impressive battlefield flexibility. I had even compiled extensive notes on the mercenary frontier companies whose combat prowess belied their relatively small numbers, all formidable in their own right, yet all comprehensible within established military frameworks, all following the predictable patterns of evolved sentient combat doctrine. Then I encountered mentions of the Texas Knights in after-action reports from various conflicts with the now-defunct Endurance Elect machine intelligence, references that at first seemed like translation errors or perhaps human hyperbole. Descriptions of warriors who rode quantum spurs into battle, wielding ancient-styled weapons enhanced with technologies that defied conventional analysis. Accounts of battles won against impossible odds through tactics that military simulations insisted should have resulted in total defeat. Naturally, I dismissed these as exaggerations, until the diplomatic channels I had carefully cultivated produced an unexpected invitation. The Texas Knights were willing to host a formal military attaché for cultural exchange and professional observation. My request for a formal tour with active duty knights was politely redirected. Instead, I was informed that a retired Master Sergeant, one Samuel Caldwell, would serve as my guide. "Talked 3 generations of knights," the message explained. "There's no one better to show you who we really are." I met Master Sergeant Caldwell at what humans call a ranch on the outskirts of New St. Petersburg, the primary night training facility on the colony world of New Los Alamos. Unlike the gleaming military complexes I had toured with other human forces, this location appeared deliberately rustic. Structures made of actual wood, large open fields containing grazing animals, and not a standardized barracks in sight. Caldwell himself defied my expectations of a decorated military veteran, advanced in age even by human standards, with deeply lined features that spoke of decades under alien suns. He wore no uniform, but rather what I recognized as traditional Western clothing: denim pants, a checked shirt, and a wide-brimmed hat that he removed briefly in greeting. Most surprising were his quantum spurs, the legendary technology of the Texas Knights, visible as faint blue trails of energy when he walked. Unlike the crisp uniform patterns I had observed in promotional materials about active knights, his energy signatures appeared more complex, almost textured with layers that shifted and interplayed in ways my instruments struggled to analyze. "Ambassador Thanik," he greeted me, extending a weathered hand. "Welcome to New Los Alamos. Heard you wanted to understand the Knights. Figured an old warhorse like me might give you a different perspective than the shiny officers they usually trot out for diplomats." His directness was refreshing after weeks of carefully calibrated diplomatic exchanges. "I appreciate your candor, Master Sergeant," I replied. "My assignment is to assess the Texas Knights as a potential military threat to Concordance interests." Caldwell laughed, a sound that contained genuine amusement rather than mockery. "Well then, at least you're honest about it. That'll make this easier." He gestured toward a hovering transport nearby. "Come on. If you want to understand the Knights, we should start at the beginning. It transpired was not a military facility, but a small, reverent space that Caldwell referred to as the First Spur Memorial. a modest building constructed to resemble an ancient earth structure called a livestock barn. Its interior contained not weapons or tactical displays, but preserved artifacts from what Caldwell explained was pre-spaceflight, before quantum technology, before interstellar travel, before the nights as you know them. There was just Texas, he explained, moving slowly among glass cases containing objects that appeared functionally obsolete but maintained with evident care. A place with its own way of doing things, its own code. He paused before a display containing what appeared to be primitive riding equipment, leather saddles, metal spurs, and reins designed for controlling animals. His spurs belonged to an ancestor of mine from the 1880s, Caldwell said, his quantum spurs leaving faint blue trails as he gestured toward the display. Too many greats to count at this point. He was a Texas Ranger back on Earth. That's over 800 years ago now, way before we discovered quantum technology or encountered the endurance elect. I examined the crude metal implements with polite interest, unsure of their relevance to my assessment of night military capabilities. The Texas Rangers were peacekeepers, Caldwell continued, seeming to sense my confusion. Enforcement across vast territories with minimal support, often operating alone against overwhelming odds. They developed a particular mindset: independence, adaptability, absolute determination. When humans began exploring the stars, those qualities became even more valuable. He moved to another display, this one containing what appeared to be early prototypes of modern quantum spurs. Crude by current standards, but recognizably ancestors to the technology that had made the Knights legendary. First generation, he explained, developed during the colony wars, before the endurance elect threat was fully understood. Scientists discovered that quantum particles could be entangled with human neural patterns, creating technology that responded not just to physical commands but to intention, emotion, intuition. And someone connected this discovery to Texas cultural symbols, I observed. Exactly, Caldwell nodded approvingly. Bata Ganzurek, herself descended from Texas immigrants with Mongolian heritage, recognized that the unpredictable quantum interactions worked best with operators who weren't trying to control them with rigid protocols. The kind of adaptive, improvisational thinking that characterized Texas culture was perfectly suited to quantum technology. This explained much about the distinctive approach of the Knights. Their technology hadn't shaped their culture. Their pre-existing culture had shaped how they implemented advanced technology. So the Knights began as an adaptation of Texas cultural practices to quantum warfare, I summarized. Close enough, Caldwell acknowledged. Though we'd say Texas culture didn't adapt to quantum warfare, it turned out to be perfectly suited for it already. The universe just caught up to what Texans always knew. Sometimes you've got to ride straight at a problem that logic says you can't beat. Our next stop provided a stark contrast to the historical reverence of the memorial. Caldwell directed our transport to the training grounds of the Knight Academy, where young cadets were engaged in combat exercises utilizing the full array of modern quantum technology. My classroom for 30 years, Caldwell explained with evident pride, taught everything from basic quantum resonance to advanced tactical improvisation. Some of the finest Knights serving today passed through these grounds under my instruction. I observed the training with professional interest. Unlike the rigid, standardized exercises I had witnessed in other human military organizations, the Knight cadets appeared to be engaging in something more akin to improvised dance than conventional combat drilling. Their quantum spurs left complex patterns of blue energy as they moved, no two trainees producing identical signatures. "You're noticing there's no standard form," Caldwell observed, watching my reaction. "That's intentional. We don't train Knights to fight identically. We train them to develop their own unique quantum signatures. Makes them unpredictable to enemies who try to identify patterns." "But surely this creates coordination difficulties in actual combat situations," I inquired. "That's what they all think," Caldwell chuckled. "Watch closer." As I observed more carefully, I began to notice subtle harmonics between the apparently chaotic energy patterns. Where two cadets' paths crossed, Their quantum trails didn't simply intersect, but momentarily synchronized, creating brief but complex interference patterns before diverging again. Quantum resonance, Caldwell explained. Each night's signature is unique, but calibrated to harmonize with other nights' patterns at key moments. Creates tactical opportunities that are impossible to predict if you're not part of the quantum network. Drove the Endurance elect absolutely crazy. Their predictive algorithms could never account for the seemingly random moments when night patterns would suddenly synchronize to create localized reality distortions. A training instructor approached. A woman, perhaps half Caldwell's age, but with quantum spurs that left impressively complex energy patterns. She saluted Caldwell with evident respect. "Master Sergeant," she greeted him, "the cadets heard you were on grounds. Would you honor us with an observation of their quantum spur evaluation?" "Captain Kawasaki?" Caldwell returned the salute with a warmth that suggested personal connection. "I'd be delighted. The ambassador here is trying to understand what makes nights unique." Captain Kawasaki turned to me with a formal nod. "You're in good hands, Ambassador. Master Sergeant Caldwell taught me everything I know about quantum harmonics. Now I'm teaching his grandson, though the boy hardly needs help, with quantum patterns going back 5 generations in his spurs." As we moved to a viewing platform overlooking a larger training area, Caldwell explained, "Captain Kawasaki is referring to my grandson, Samuel Caldwell III, 3rd generation knight in active service. His father, my son, is Colonel Justin Caldwell, commanding the Remember Travis battle group on the Frontier Expansion Initiative." The pride in his voice was unmistakable. I made note of this familial connection. Dynastic military traditions often indicated cultural values that transcended formal doctrine. "Your family has a significant history with the Knights," I observed. "We do," Caldwell acknowledged, "though we're hardly unique in that. Many Knight families can trace their service back generations. The quantum spurs get passed down, you see, each generation adding their experiences to the matrix before handing them to the next." Below us, cadets had formed into what appeared to be evaluation groups. One by one, they demonstrated complex maneuvers that caused their quantum spurs to generate increasingly elaborate energy patterns. Some clearly struggled to maintain control of the unpredictable quantum effects, while others moved with a fluidity that suggested deeper integration with the technology. "There," Caldwell pointed, "3rd group, 2nd from the left. That's young Sam." I focused my attention on the indicated cadet, a young human male whose quantum spurs left notably more complex patterns than his peers. Even to my untrained assessment, there was a confidence to his movements that spoke of inherited aptitude. "His patterns show Caldwell signatures going back to Operation Blitzkrieg," Caldwell commented. "My own combat experiences, my son's campaigns against the collector incursions, all encoded in those quantum matrices. He's not just learning from his instructors. He's drawing on the accumulated experience of every Caldwell who ever wore the spurs." This explained much about the Knights' remarkable combat effectiveness across generations. They weren't simply training new warriors from scratch with each generation, but building upon an accumulated quantum record of successful tactics and techniques. "An impressive system for preserving institutional knowledge," I noted. Caldwell shook his head slightly. "It's more than institutional knowledge, Ambassador. When Sam activates those spurs in combat, he's not accessing a database. He's feeling what his ancestors felt, responding with intuitions shaped by battles fought before he was born. It's knowing in your bones, not your brain, why a particular approach will work when logic says it shouldn't." As we watched the evaluation continue, I began to appreciate the subtleties of the quantum spur technology that had made the Knights legendary. It wasn't merely advanced quantum mechanics. It was quantum mechanics specifically adapted to human neural patterns and cultural frameworks, creating a combat system that was simultaneously high technology and deeply intuitive. "Hungry?" Caldwell asked as the cadet evaluation concluded. Without waiting for my response, he directed our transport toward what appeared to be a settlement on the periphery of the training grounds. "Thought we might grab some authentic Texas barbecue while we talk. best way to understand a culture is through its food. The establishment he selected appeared deliberately designed to evoke pre-spaceflight Texas aesthetics. Wooden construction, manual entry doors, and cooking methods that seemed unnecessarily labor-intensive compared to modern food synthesis. Cooper's Pit BBQ, same family recipes since Earth. I was immediately struck by the diverse clientele, active duty knights in formal uniforms alongside retired veterans, cadets, and civilian support personnel, all sharing communal tables with none of the rigid seating hierarchies common in military organizations I had previously observed. An elderly human behind the counter greeted Caldwell with evident familiarity. "Sam, haven't seen you in weeks. The usual?" "Thanks, Cooper, and whatever my guest here can safely consume." Once we were seated with what Caldwell assured me was the best brisket in human space, modified for my physiological requirements, our conversation continued. "You mentioned your son commands the Remember Travis battle group," I prompted. "An important posting, I understand. Flagship of the Frontier Expansion Initiative," Caldwell confirmed, his expression mixing pride with what appeared to be wistfulness. "Justin has been commanding it for 7 years now. Extended deep space deployment, securing new worlds for colonization following the Endurance Elect collapse." "You miss him," I observed. "Every day," Caldwell acknowledged simply. "But that's the night life. We go where we're needed, often far from home, for years at a stretch. Been that way since the first colony ships left Earth." A group of active duty knights entered the establishment, creating a momentary ripple of attention. Their formal uniforms contrasted with Caldwell's civilian attire, but I noticed they all stopped to pay respects to the elderly veteran before finding their own table. "4th Squadron, Quantum Cavalry Division," Caldwell explained, noting my observation. "Just returned from deployment along the Concordance border regions, if I'm not mistaken." This casual mention of operations near Concordance space was clearly deliberate, a subtle reminder that the Knights maintained active awareness of potential threats, including my own civilization. "And what can you tell me about Knight operations in that region?" I inquired, matching his casual tone. Caldwell smiled slightly. "Observational only, I'm sure. The Knights aren't in the business of provoking conflicts, Ambassador, only responding decisively when threats emerge." His emphasis on the word decisively carried clear subtext. I decided to shift the conversation to less politically sensitive territory. "I've noticed the Knights maintain many cultural practices that seem anachronistic. Physical food preparation, wooden structures, ceremonial clothing. Yet you deploy the most advanced quantum technology in human space. The contrast is striking." Caldwell nodded approvingly, as if I'd finally asked a question of genuine interest. "That's the heart of what makes the Knights different from every other military force you've studied, Ambassador. We don't see technology as replacing tradition. We see tradition as enhancing technology." He gestured around the restaurant where Knights of various ranks conversed in a relaxed, familiar manner. "Look around. What do you see?" "Community," I observed after a moment. "Connections that transcend formal rank structure." "Exactly. The Knights aren't just a military organization. We're a culture, a way of life. These shared traditions, the food, the music, the stories, they create bonds that quantum technology amplifies rather than replaces. When Knights fight together, their quantum spurs don't just interact on a technological level, they resonate on a cultural level. This explained much about the Knights' legendary unit cohesion in combat situations. Where other military forces relied on rigid command structures and standardized protocols, the Knights had developed a system where cultural bonds created the foundation for their technological advantages. "I'm beginning to understand," I acknowledged. "The quantum technology amplifies existing cultural patterns rather than imposing new ones." "You're a quick study, Ambassador," Caldwell said approvingly. "Now you're starting to grasp why the Endurance Elect could never fully counter our tactics. They could analyze our technology, our weapons, our individual capabilities, but they could never understand the cultural context that made it all work together." After our meal, Caldwell suggested we visit what he called the heart of Knight culture, a location some distance from the formal training grounds. Our transport took us to a sprawling complex that appeared to be equal parts museum, community center, and ceremonial space. "The Hall of Spurs," Caldwell announced as we approached the impressive structure. Unlike the deliberately rustic aesthetic of other Knight facilities, this building combined traditional materials with obvious quantum-enhanced architecture, wood and stone interwoven with glowing blue energy patterns that shifted and flowed across the facade. "Every Knight who falls in service has their quantum spurs preserved here," he explained as we entered, "not just as memorials, but as living repositories of their experience and knowledge." The interior opened into a vast circular chamber, its walls lined with thousands of quantum spurs mounted in specialized display cases. Unlike inactive technology, these spurs continued to emit faint blue energy patterns, creating a complex, ever-shifting luminescence throughout the space. "Active quantum matrices," I observed with surprise. "The patterns are still running." "Of course," Caldwell nodded. "Death doesn't end a Knight's service. The quantum patterns they develop throughout their lifetime continue to influence the next generation. New Knights come here to study specific patterns, to learn from those who came before, to draw inspiration from the accumulated wisdom of our ancestors." We moved slowly through the hall, Caldwell occasionally pausing to indicate specific displays. "Marshal Brett Kowalski," he said reverently before one set of particularly complex spurs, "led the offensive against the Endurance Elect outposts following the Abbott Colony defense, fell during the exploration of Proxima Viridian 4. His son followed him into service, carrying forward his quantum patterns. His granddaughter commands a Knight division now." The personal connection with which he spoke suggested direct knowledge rather than historical recitation. "You knew him?" I observed. "Served under his command for 7 years, Caldwell confirmed, "one of the finest Knights to ever wear the spurs. When he fell, I helped recover his equipment for transfer back to his son. That's a sacred duty among the Knights, ensuring the quantum matrices survive, even when the night." We continued through the hall, eventually reaching a section that appeared newer, with displays dating from the infamous Operation Blitzkrieg, the decisive campaign that had ended the Endurance Elect threat permanently. "My own contribution to Knight history," Caldwell said quietly, indicating a simple plaque on the wall. 30 years of active service, 15 campaigns, 7 major engagements against the Endurance Elect. Not as distinguished as some, but I did my part. And then 30 years teaching new Knights, I added, recognizing that his contribution extended far beyond his direct combat service. "That was the greater honor," he acknowledged. "Shaping 3 generations of Knights, seeing them develop their own unique quantum signatures, while building on what came before." As we stood in the heart of this repository of Knight history and tradition, I found myself reassessing my understanding of their military effectiveness. The Texas Knights weren't merely a fighting force equipped with advanced technology. They were the living embodiment of an adaptive culture, one that had preserved its core values while continuously evolving its implementation of those values across centuries of technological advancement. "Tell me, Ambassador," Caldwell asked suddenly, "what will you report to your superiors about the Texas Knights?" The directness of the question was unexpected, but consistent with the straightforward approach he had demonstrated throughout our interaction. "I will report that the Knights represent a distinctive military capability within human space," I replied carefully. "One that combines advanced quantum technology with deeply embedded cultural traditions to create combat effectiveness that exceeds conventional analysis." Caldwell studied me for a moment, his aged features revealing nothing of his thoughts. "And will you recommend that the Concordants avoid conflict with the Knights?" I considered my response carefully. "Based on my observations, I will inform my superiors that the Knights present unique challenges that cannot be adequately assessed through standard threat matrices. Your technological capabilities are formidable, but more significantly, your cultural cohesion and adaptive tactical approach resist conventional countermeasures." "A diplomatic answer," Caldwell observed with a slight smile. "Let me be more direct. as an old knight who's seen too much war to mince words. The concordance is expanding. Eventually your borders will push against worlds under knight protection. When that happens, you do well to remember something. He gestured around at the thousands of preserved quantum spurs, each representing a knight who had fallen in service. We don't seek conflict, Ambassador. Never have. The knights exist to protect, not to conquer. But what we protect, we will defend with everything we have. Not just our technology or our weapons, but with the accumulated experience and determination of every knight who ever wore the spurs. The warning was clear but delivered without hostility, a simple statement of fact rather than a threat. I understand, Master Sergeant, I acknowledged, and I will ensure my superiors understand as well. Our final stop was perhaps the most illuminating. Caldwell brought me to his personal property, a modest homestead some distance from the main knight facilities. Unlike the formal structures we had visited, this was clearly a lived-in space containing the accumulated possessions and memories of a long life. Thought you should see how a knight lives when they're not being knights, he explained, as we settled on what he called a porchman outdoor seating area overlooking expansive fields where actual horses grazed peacefully. Most assessments of military forces focus on their weapons, their tactics, their formal capabilities. But to really understand the knights, you need to see what we're fighting for. He indicated the peaceful landscape before us. This is what matters. Home, family, the quiet moments between the battles. Knights don't fight because we love fighting. We fight so places like this can exist. On the walls of his home, I had noticed numerous images of what appeared to be Caldwell's family. His son in knight formal attire, his grandson in cadet uniform, as well as numerous other individuals of varying ages, all displaying the distinctive Caldwell features. Your family has a proud tradition of service, I observed. 5 generations wearing the spurs, he confirmed. My great-grandfather was among the first knights to encounter the Endurance Elect. My grandfather fell during the early colonial wars. My father served 40 years, retired as a colonel. Now my son commands our flagship, and my grandson follows in our footsteps. A significant legacy, I acknowledged. Does it create pressure on each generation to continue the tradition? Caldwell considered this question thoughtfully. We never force it. The quantum spurs can't be worn effectively by someone who doesn't choose the path willingly, but yes, there's a connection that pulls Caldwell descendants toward service. The quantum matrices in our family spurs carry centuries of experience, centuries of purpose. It calls to the blood in a way science can't fully explain. He reached beside his chair, retrieving what appeared to be his own quantum spurs, not worn at the moment but still emanating faint blue energy patterns. These have been in my family for 5 generations, he explained, handling them with evident reverence. When my time comes, they'll pass to my son, and eventually to young Sam. They carry the experiences of every Caldwell who ever wore them into battle, every victory, every defeat, every moment of courage or fear or determination. I studied the devices with new appreciation, understanding that they represented far more than advanced quantum technology. They were physical manifestations of a continuous cultural tradition, repositories of accumulated wisdom and experience that defied conventional military analysis. And this is common among knight families? I inquired. It's our way, Caldwell confirmed, though not all knights come from legacy families. Some of our finest warriors are first generation, drawn to the knights because something in their spirit resonates with our traditions. The quantum spurs don't care about your lineage, only about your heart, your determination, your willingness to stand between danger and those who can't protect themselves. As the local sun began to set, casting long shadows across the landscape, Caldwell fell silent for a time, seemingly lost in memories. When he spoke again, his tone had shifted slightly. I won't see another Endurance Elect campaign, he said quietly. My war ended with Operation Blitzkrieg, but the Knights continue, adapting to new threats, new challenges. The quantum technology evolves, the tactics refine, but the core remains the same. Texas determination carried to the stars. He turned to me directly, his aged features catching the fading light. "What will you tell your superiors, Ambassador? Truly?" In that moment I decided to offer the frank assessment that diplomacy might have otherwise tempered. "I will tell them that the Texas Knights represent a military capability that cannot be adequately quantified through conventional analysis. That your strength lies not primarily in your advanced technology but in something more fundamental, an unshakable cultural identity that infuses everything from your combat tactics to your educational systems." I gestured to his quantum spurs. "I will tell them that defeating the Knights would require not just overcoming your weapons, but breaking a spirit that has sustained your organization through centuries of conflict. And based on historical evidence, I will suggest that such an undertaking would be inadvisable in the extreme." Caldwell nodded slowly, seeming satisfied with this assessment. "A fair conclusion, Ambassador, and if I might offer one last piece of Knight wisdom passed down since our earliest days on Earth, the strongest defensive position isn't a fortress or a shield. It's having an opponent who knows that attacking you would cost them more than they're willing to pay," I observed. "Deterrence through demonstrated determination," he corrected gently. The Endurance Elect had superior numbers, advanced technology, predictive algorithms that should have guaranteed their victory. What they couldn't calculate was the human spirit, particularly the Texas variety. As darkness fell and we prepared to conclude my observation period, Caldwell surprised me with an unexpected gesture. From a small container beside his chair, he removed what appeared to be a simple metal object, a miniature representation of quantum spurs crafted from actual metal rather than energy fields. "A token of Texas hospitality," he explained, presenting it to me, "and a reminder of what you've learned here." The gift carried symbolic significance beyond mere courtesy, a physical representation of the cultural exchange we had engaged in, and perhaps a subtle reminder of the capabilities he had revealed throughout our interaction. As my observation period concluded and I prepared to board my diplomatic vessel for departure, I was handed a small sealed envelope by a Knight aide. "Master Sergeant Caldwell asked that this be delivered to you once you were underway," the young human explained. "I waited until I was aboard my ship and in the privacy of my quarters before opening the envelope. Inside was a simple handwritten note on actual paper, an archaic medium that somehow seemed fitting for a message from Caldwell. Ambassador Thanik, I know a spy when I see one, even one as diplomatic as yourself. I trust you found sufficient intelligence to convince your concordance that humanity and our allies should never be bothered. The Knights have stood guard for centuries and will stand for centuries more. The miniature spurs I gave you, look closer. They're encoded with just enough quantum signature to be recognized by any Knight you might encounter in your travels. Should you ever find yourself in need of assistance in Knight territory, show them. They'll know you've been vouched for by an old sergeant who believed you might understand us better than most. Remember what you saw here, not just our strength, but what gives it purpose." Samuel Caldwell, MSG. Ret. Texas Knights, 3rd Quantum Cavalry Division. I found myself staring at the note for some time, the implications of both the warning and the unexpected gesture of potential assistance requiring careful consideration. The man had clearly known my true purpose from the beginning, yet had chosen to show me not just the Knights' capabilities but their underlying cultural foundations. Almost as if he believed the best deterrent was not fear, but understanding. In my final report to the Fourth Sphere Concordance, I would be unambiguous. The Texas Knights represented not merely a military power to be respected, but a cultural force to be understood. Their strength lay not primarily in their weapons or ships, but in their unshakable identity, their absolute certainty in who they were and what they stood for. In the standardized threat assessment protocol of the Concordance, I would categorize them as non-expansionist defensive power of extreme capability. Recommended approach, respectful non-interference and potential alliance rather than confrontation under any circumstances. Because what I had learned above all else from Master Sergeant Samuel Caldwell was this: The Texas Knights did not seek to impose their will across the stars, but woe to any force foolish enough to threaten what they had sworn to protect. End of official observation report. Personal addendum. I find myself strangely moved by what I have witnessed among the Knights, particularly through the perspective of Master Sergeant Caldwell. His quiet dignity, his evident pride in his family's service, his absolute certainty in the values that have guided his life, these qualities transcend our biological differences and speak to something universal in sentient experience. The small metal spurs he gifted me sit on my desk as I compile this report, occasionally catching the light in ways that almost suggest the blue energy patterns of their active counterparts. Perhaps there is something in this Texas spirit that even the concordants might learn from, despite our different evolutionary paths. And should our civilizations ever find themselves at odds, I shall remember the old knight's words about what truly gives strength its purpose. Thank you for listening to this story. I hope you enjoyed it. Be sure to leave this video a like and subscribe if you want to see more stuff like this. Video shares, memberships, and super thanks help the channel grow as well, so feel free to partner with this channel in that way as we grow. With that all said, thank you again for listening to the story, and thank you for your time. On the left side of your screen are some videos I think you might be interested in. I hope to see you in the next one.